Hello and welcome to the Voices Project. I'm Liz Barker and I'm joined by Becky Webb. And together on this podcast, we talk to people about their experiences of the arts during the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis of 2020. This week we have an interview with Lizzie Nunnery. Lizzie is a playwright, musician and screenwriter, and we spoke about how the pandemic had been affecting her and her partner and the importance of community and youth arts. Like everything in this pandemic, the podcast is recorded over remote video conferencing software. The Voices Project is an open platform for anyone who is involved in any way with the arts to share their thoughts, feelings and experiences of art in the current crisis. If you would like to participate and share your voice, you can find out how to do that by visiting our website, www.marchforthearts.com. Hello, Lizzie Nunnery. Thank you so much for joining me and Becky today on the March for the Arts Voices podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thanks for asking me.
Yeah, really excited to be chatting today. So, what I would just like to start us off with, if you don't mind, for anyone who's listening who perhaps isn't familiar with yourself and your work, would you mind just sort of giving us a bit of an introduction to you and what you do in the arts?
I'm a script writer and a songwriter, a singer. I've mostly made a living as a script writer, lots of theatre and radio, and then in the last couple of years I've been getting into screen as well, working on a feature film and working on a few other projects. And then for years I've been out performing as a musician. I work in a duo with my partner Vidar Norheim. We write songs together and do gigs together. So yeah, lots of different kind of angles on the arts in a way.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm wondering, did you start as a musician and then become a script writer, or did you start as a script writer, or was it more of a sort of a symbiotic thing?
I did start music first, actually. I was doing acoustic nights and songwriter nights when I was like 16, 17. That was the first kind of performance that I did. And yeah, I was always very instinctive about songwriting. And then I tried playwriting while I was a student. There was a competition and I had to go, and then kind of fell in love with writing dialogue. And then the big thing for me was that when I left uni, I got a place on the Young Writers programme at the Everyman with Suzanne Bell, who was there at the time as the literary manager. And that was what really kind of channeled me into trying to make a career as a theatre writer. That was an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, it's fantastic, the what they do at the Everyman with all the sort of the Young Everyman and Playhouse stuff that they do. I myself, I did the Young Technicians course when I came out of university, and I think Becky, you were involved with the Young Everyman.
Yeah, I did the Young Writers course. Yeah, Young Writers course with Lizzie.
Just did it? That,
it was Suzanne Bell. It's amazing. And John Larkin as well. He was part of our group as well. So really, really great stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, and I think so do you think that getting that start quite young and getting that support quite young sort of instilled in you a sort of that realised that you could do the arts as a full-time thing, that this was what your plan was going to be? Or is it always, for me personally, I'm still kind of making it up as I go along. I've always gone, you know what, I want to be in the arts, I want to keep being around theatre. Has there sort of been like did you ever make a plan of like, this is what I want to go, this is the journey I want to go on, or is it naturally sort of forming?
I always wanted to be a writer, and then my experience with script writing at uni made me quite certain I wanted to write theatre. And I think it was the connection with the Everyman in general that made it all seem possible and practical, you know, that I'd have to put in an awful lot of work and probably still have quite a bit of luck, but that it was possible. And more than just seeing what was possible for writers, I remember the first time I went into the annex building when it was part of the Everyman and all the officers were in there, and just being really blown away by all these people who were working in all these jobs in these little rooms behind perspex windows. Because like a lot of people, I had that idea as a teenager, that theatre was writers and directors and actors, and that was probably about it. Maybe someone worked in the box office, but like looking around and going, oh no, there's a literary department and a finance department and a development department where they're raising funding, and I was so excited by that. And then I actually did work for about 3 years as literary assistant as well, as Suzanne Bell's assistant, which was such an education, learning how theatre operates, how scripts operate, how you might get work on a stage. I saw all that from the inside, really. So I had kind of 2 angles on it, which was a real luxury actually when I look back.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think I remember that. I think I remember the thing for me that made me want to start thinking about theatre. I think I saw a production. I can't even remember what the production was, and I sort of saw this stage show, and it was a fantastic large stage show. And I remember like there was sort of like big pieces of truck setting coming on, so like big massive sets that would just sort of swing into the middle of the stage, and there was a track that was moving and people were flying. And I remember thinking to myself, there are so many more people working on this than I can see. There are sort of like, yes, all the actors are here, and there were some musicians, and I could see the musicians, and it was a massive, I think it was one of the national productions potentially. And I think I saw it, and it was definitely in a very big theatre. And I just remember sitting there and thinking, there must be so many people here that I can't see, and I want to know what they do, and I want to know about them. And I think that sort of curiosity for me really kicked me into this. And then obviously finding out about all these sort of different things really gave me a real passion for this idea of interconnectivity, and this idea that actually me as an individual in my arts organisation or my theatre or wherever I'm working, I'm dependent on a full team. And that for me, that community element is what's really, really important to me about the arts, and what's important to me about getting people to understand. But I'm just wondering, do you have something particular about working in theatre or working with writing or working with music that is like the thing where you go, that's why I do this? What is this is why I do this for you?
The thing that keeps me doing it is about clearing some space to make sense of things, and working on a script, getting it on a stage. Is that I think we're constantly living in a state of confusion. Even as humans, we're always just trying to work each other out and work ourselves out, work out how to be the best people we can be in the world and survive. And there's something that's such a privilege about getting to be an artist of some sort, where you can actually make it your job to unravel things and make connections and get back and ask, is society working in the way it should? Do we know how to love each other in the way we should? All those big questions. And the brilliant thing with theatre is it's live. So that whereas you can explore stories like I have done on radio or I've started to do on screen, and that can be immediate and intimate in different ways. There's nothing really that replaces that for being part of a community that has an emotional experience. Everybody breathing in at once, or laughing at the same time, or reacting to that same idea. I think that humanises us in a very particular way. It reminds us of where we are in society and the fact that we do all need to interconnect, and all our lives are tangled up inextricably. We have to understand each other. So that's quite a rambly way to answer your question. But in all honesty, I feel like if I didn't do creative things, I'd go a bit mad. I need to do them to kind of stay calm and carry on. Yeah.
Do you think as well, something with the music, and you were saying you perform live with gigs, is that part of it as well, that kind of live element of with song, just that direct connection with your sort of audience and that feedback that you get from the audience and as a singer? Is that something as well, do you think, that draws you to keep doing your music side of stuff?
Yeah, I do. I think that there's something great about the way a song lives on. Once it's been heard, people carry a song around. And songs I wrote years ago, people might come up to me and say, oh, I still play that in my car, or I still think about those lyrics, and it kind of travels beyond you, which is really wonderful. And then maybe in a slightly more egotistical way, I love performance as a musician for weirdly the stillness of it. I'm not necessarily a very extrovert person, but actually I find it much harder to be in a busy room where everybody's talking and competing for attention, in complex social interactions, than to stand up on a stage where there's a structure and the lights go down and now it's my turn to sing. And there's a kind of simplicity to that. And, these songs that have been honed, that me and Vidar have worked on together, these lyrics that I've kind of slowly pieced together because I had something very particular to say. I get the chance to just take that moment and speak to those people in front of me in a very clear way. And that's quite addictive, actually. It's hard to give that up, and hopefully it has a value.
I think it has a massive value, and I was going to say as well, but please don't for 1 minute think that you're rambling when I take about 5 minutes to ask a very complicated roundaway question as well. I do this. We have me and Becky sometimes have a little tally of how many like strange metaphors I managed to drop into these recordings as well. We've had all sorts of strange ramblings from myself, so you're in very good company for rambling. I definitely will say.
It was when the Greeks come out and the Aristotles, we've hit peak and we love it. We embrace it.
Yes. I'm not afraid to quote Aristotle for a very unrelated question point we are discovering, but yeah, no, I fully like really feel and understand what you're saying there with that sort of the structure of it and that idea of actually, even though what we're doing is live and it's unpredictable, I mean, Becky and myself both work in improv as well as other sort of types of theatre as well, so we go the extra step in terms of the unpredictable, but there's still structure in that. And actually for me it's very comforting to know that, okay, yes, I don't know what the audience are going to do, I know what we're supposed to be doing, but when the lights go down anything might happen, but actually I know what to do when the lights go down. And I think that for me is another reason why being in this crisis right now and seeing the instability and the unknown about what's happening to the arts actually makes me really worried about, what if I have to stop working in the arts? What if I have to go and be in another industry or another environment where I don't know what happens when the lights go down? And I'm just wondering if any of these sort of things that I'm sort of having to start processing and thinking about it, how is the crisis facing you as your sort of script writing and your music? Have you still got sort of projects that you're working on perhaps? Has everything come to a stop? Maybe what was it like when lockdown hit, and then how are things sort of coming back through?
Well, at the beginning there were things that kind of disappeared, so my partner Vidar, apart from doing music with me, is a gigging musician who does sometimes hundreds of gigs in a year, and our diaries are always just full of him being in Scotland and Holland and all over the world and everything. So there was that. When a week before, I think we locked down, Ireland locked down, and he was in Dublin for a gig. Wow. He'd flown over there, and his anecdote is he got in the shower, washed his hair ready for his gig, got out, turned the TV on, and it said all venues are shutting down, everything's shutting down. So he just got in a taxi and got to the airport and got on a plane as fast as he could and tried to get home, and luckily did get home. But there was that kind of strange moment of normality breaking. We then just opened our diaries and crossed out months and months of income, with this sort of surreal feeling of, right, so none of that is happening, none of those events are taking place. And for me, working in theatre, I was going to adapt Hedda Gabler, Ibsen play, for a theatre. I won't tell you which one because obviously it didn't go ahead. And they just couldn't think that far ahead suddenly in their programming. They hopefully still might. Maybe it'll happen in 2023 or something like that. Fingers crossed. But that was a blow because it was something I'd always wanted to do, and it was basically going to happen, before February, March, and when people started to reassess what can we and can't we do in theatre. Will anybody come to the theatre for a while? So that was the kind of the downside professionally. the things we've been really grateful for are that we both, I suppose, come at the arts from different angles. So Vidar teaches at LIPA, and his teaching all immediately went online, but it was still there. He kind of just disappeared off with his laptop and spoke to his students over Zoom. And I was really lucky to have some screen projects that I suppose probably more uncertain in terms of production now, but development is long, and I've continued to write those scripts, you know, being optimistic about the fact that they can be produced in the future. So yeah, I felt very, very grateful I think to be kind of established as a writer. Actually, that's the thought that's come to me so many times. I feel so sorry for people who were just getting started. I think if you look at the way the government support has worked as well, so many of the people who've kind of fallen through the gaps and haven't received that financial support are people who just haven't been doing it long enough. Or, you need 50% of your income to be self-employed to receive the government self-employed support. So what if your income's at 45% self-employed, and the rest was casual jobs in cafes and bars that have also disappeared? I think that's a lot of people. And we know people like that. So yeah, I've been really kind of counting my blessings, and also feeling anxious about the wider industry and younger artists. And this had happened to me 10 years ago, it really would have been massive in terms of whether or not I could have even carried on as a writer.
Yeah, and it's a thing I'm hearing a lot. I'm currently doing a lot of work locally with freelance technicians and people from the freelance production industry as part of a sort of an offshoot of the Fuel task force that was set up for freelancers right at the start of the pandemic. And yeah, there's the big scope of people that sort of come to our group meetings, where we've got very sort of established 20 plus years in the industry being a stage manager or being a production manager. And then I've got people who've literally just graduated from university. And the difference in that sort of, and there's different issues people sort of bring up, whereby you've got the established person going, I'm really worried that I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to be, when things eventually reopen, that there won't be as much stuff, and there'll be more competition for jobs, and there'll be more competition for work. And so you've got the established person who's going, I've spent 20, 30 years of my life doing this, and I want to be back on that top of that list to get back into work. But then you've got the graduate person who's going, if you're only going to employ experienced people, I'm never going to make it into this industry. And I think actually this is a thing we're going to need to start addressing going forward, because everything is changing so quickly and so rapidly. I mean, we're recording this on the 23rd of September, and we're just going back into another sort of phased lockdown situation, whereby last week or the week before, when we've been recording podcasts, we're talking about reopening, and now we can't talk about reopening again. And I think this ever quick changing situation is making it really difficult to sort of know where you are in things. I don't know if you've got any sort of upcoming things that you either know about or would like to know, like I've got ideas that might happen, or if you're still sort of going, I don't know what's coming. Is there any sort of thing on the horizon for you?
I've been working on a script with Box of Tricks Theatre, who are based in Manchester, for a couple of years, and we were hoping that it might be produced at the end of this year, and it looks like, all being well in the world, it'll tour spring 2022. So I mean, that's kind of close enough to keep me almost cheerful. No, it's a point to aim for, isn't it? It's like a kind of light on the horizon. Theatre timelines can be so long anyway. That's what I kind of been telling myself to cheer myself up about it all. And it's just a chance to make sure that script is as good as it can possibly be. But then I think for a lot of people, if they didn't also have all the forms of, sorry, I'm getting a bit lost now.
No, that's all right.
I think if I didn't also have the income from screenwriting, or things I can pursue in radio, relationships that already exist with radio or TV producers, for instance, then having a play on in 2 years' time is not going to be enough for me to keep focused on being a scriptwriter. So I think it's good to. I am optimistic about the fact that theatre will be back and audiences will be back, and we need it too much to let it go. My worry is about, in the meantime, where are those artists going who would be focused on writing that next great play, or would already be struggling to clear the time to write that next great play, and now maybe just don't have that time because they're constantly chasing the tail and trying to find income. So I do think it's important that the conversation recognises that and supports those kind of newer or younger people in the arts.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I'm curious, because it's something that sort of comes up in conversations I have, but again, with more sort of technical people, as sort of things that we're curious about. But I wonder, from your perspective as a writer, do you think potentially the work we're going to start seeing that is being made will be sort of constrained, isn't quite the right word, but crafted to be more COVID viable, if that makes sense? Do you think we'll see more sort of two-handers or smaller pieces? Is anyone sort of talking about this in the writing world?
I haven't had those conversations yet for stage because it is all really paused. I don't think those meetings are particularly happening. I've had some of those conversations about practicalities for screen and how people might continue to make work and adapt stories to those scenarios of different types of film sets. I think there's two things really. Theatre is always operating under constraints. You're constantly trying to think theatrically, which really comes down to making your constraints opportunities rather than looking at it and going, oh, I wish this was on screen, or a helicopter would be much better on screen. You're trying to write the story that doesn't have the helicopter that approaches those same ideas in new ways. That's my theatricality workshop there, condensed into about 4 sentences. So I don't worry about the quality being any less great, because writers or directors, actors have those particular constraints. And also we've already had about 10 years of austerity in the arts, of things in many ways getting smaller. The only times I've been able to write for big casts have been when I've been writing plays for young people, be performed in community settings, or actually once, with the exception of the rep company at the Everyman, which was a very particular scenario. There were going to be 12 actors. I could use 8 of them. In general, writers are already thinking two-hander monologue. If you put a script in front of someone with 5 actors, you probably already were going to be asked, could you maybe kill one of them off? So I hope that there's still space for bigger shows, bigger modes of storytelling, and I hope that doesn't only exist in the West End. I think people will have to be even more creative with budgets, and maybe with the way that we overlap what's been thought of as community theatre with what's been thought of as professional theatre. Maybe the way that we combine the two has to become more inventive, really.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I saw, even yesterday, I think I saw a news article that was saying that the Department of Culture, Media and Sport had kind of said professional theatre can carry on producing shows with more than 6 people in them, but amateur theatre can't produce shows with more than 6 people in them. And for me, that really cripples community work, and it really sort of starts to knock back at this idea of actually the big part of what I think most of the arts does that people don't see is community work and community engagement. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't have been in a very small community youth theatre company when I was growing up in the very, very quiet Lancashire suburbs, I wouldn't have gone into the arts. I would never have seen that as a progression path. And I wonder what do you think potentially the shape of community work might be changing into if we are coming under Rule of 6 regulations, coming under this idea that we can't come together for community because it's viewed as amateur, and that sort of that crossing of wires, and potentially, like, could you maybe for anyone who's listening who doesn't really appreciate or understand what community means and community engagement, talk a little bit about all that and the threat to that you can maybe think?
Well, I suppose it can mean a lot of things. It can be, for instance, the elders group at the Royal Exchange in Manchester. There's a brilliant project that's been running for a long time, where older people in the Manchester community come together and make work, and they devise work and put on shows, and they would be within the Royal Exchange. So those aren't professional performers or writers, but they're engaging with a professional theatre, and potentially, draw an audience as well. And then, there's a variety of community groups operating within theatres in that way, doing work that's so vital to the people in those groups, and also that can have such creative value, value to on the stage to audience members that really shouldn't be dismissed. And I mentioned that I've written 2 plays for young people. One of them published quite recently, but the other one was for NT Connections, National Theatre run. They put out about 10 plays for young people each year in a collection, and they get them out there to schools. And that was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had, as a writer. That there were like 25 different productions that happened in the UK and beyond of this script that I'd quietly written at home. And the quality of those productions, in some cases was absolutely incredible. And some of them were happening in schools, others were like youth clubs, others were, drama clubs that were set up independently of schools. So it's actually quite moving when you start to look into all these creative settings. I almost said the word bubbles then, creative bubbles, but that word is
not quite yet
now. But it's such an important thing that we live in a country and in a culture where actually quietly and modestly the arts are really valued. There are a lot of people who understand that going along to an Amdram club and singing and telling a story in a certain way is going to enrich their lives and help them make friends and help them understand the world better. I think it can sound quite airy-fairy when we talk about this stuff, but to lose that is enormous, actually. And a lot of stuff's carrying on online, but it's not enough. Obviously, it's something, but it's not enough.
Yeah. We had an interview a couple of weeks ago with Sam Avery, who's the artistic director of the Comedy Trust here in Liverpool, and he was talking about the engagement work that they do and having to do it over Zoom, and it just not being quite the same really when you're doing community engagement. You're doing work with the people for the people, and it's all remote, and there's a different feeling to that. And I think for me, definitely that is something that we will need to, if this distancing is long term, which it looks like it will be until we've got better medical advances. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, I'm not trying to like predict the future of what we're doing, but I think to continue to sort of just bring in a blanket restriction that says, oh well, if you're amateur you can't do it, if you're professional you can do it. And I appreciate the fact that professionals need to be working to earning their money, and that's an important thing we should be propping up, but to just disregard the entire amateur and community and all of that area of what we do, I think is very foolish personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the rules are quite vague in many ways at the moment. For instance, you could be putting on a play in a school right now, but if you happen to run your drama club outside the school, maybe that's then not allowed. So I think over time, hopefully, there'll be clarity around those things. And I think you're right, it's worth defending the right of amateur groups to meet and meet safely and make work.
Yeah, and I think as well, with being so isolated, a lot of people during this entire process, actually that one glimmer of, oh, but I've got my group on a Thursday or whatever that means, I think it's very vital to a lot of people's well-being and things like that. And I think it's often sort of, I say often, I don't think it's often in the sort of my immediate world, but I think there's certain people, potentially people in power, who sort of dismiss certain things like, oh, it's just a bit of prancing around, isn't it? And yes, it is a bit of prancing around, but it's very vital prancing around, is what I would say. But yeah,
I think as well it helps keep that diversity as well. Those kind of groups, those community groups, they're the ones where it's like the people that wouldn't necessarily engage with the arts in a way. It's that way of getting people in and introducing them, and seeing that actually you are represented in it. And yeah, diversity is another really sort of vital element to that can easily just be swiped if it's all just I will not waffle now, but I'll get off my soapbox.
I know exactly what you mean, and that maybe if we hear the phrase amateur theatre, we think of like the vicar in the local village hall doing Gilbert and Sullivan, but then actually the reality is more like a diverse group of kids who probably wouldn't be in that village hall or wherever if it wasn't part of a structure, a funded structure where they've been encouraged and their creativity's been cultivated in a certain way. And if all that sidelines, then over time that becomes a huge problem for the arts, and obviously immediately it's a problem for those individuals.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is drawing us really quite nicely towards the question that we very much ask everyone who comes and joins us on this podcast. And we've had a variety of responses to this. Becky's getting excited about this question. No one who's listening can see, but Becky's sort of bouncing in her seat in sort of anticipation for so we ask everyone who joins us on this podcast, if you were given the magical opportunity right now to sit down with Oliver Dowden, who is the Culture Secretary, with Rishi Sunak, who is the Chancellor, and with Boris Johnson, who at the time of recording is the Prime Minister, what would you say to them to sort of sum up everything we've spoken about today? Anything we haven't spoken about that you think is important that they know? If you've got potentially things you think they should be doing that they're not doing, if you think certain things they're doing is terrible and why they shouldn't be doing, if you got to have that sit down conversation, what would you choose to say?
I would say I feel like there's been an unspoken agenda since 2008 to slowly reduce the arts across the country, to preserve what they perceive to be the prestigious corners of the arts, and just slowly let work around the country in what's often called regional areas, regional theatre, regional art centres, to just fade slightly. There's been a massive emphasis on business models that's completely misunderstood the creativity, the actual process that goes into making art, and completely ignored, or largely ignored, the value to people's lives through making and experiencing art. I would say that that's all been magnified in the last few months, and it's obvious to me that they don't mind allowing certain institutions to wither, and I think that's really immoral. And actually there shouldn't be a discussion that's about the economy and then the arts is in brackets at the side of it, because one, the arts is a successful economy in itself. It's a successful industry. You have to fund the Everyman in Liverpool or Northern Stage in Newcastle in order to have an arts ecology that develops artists, technicians, stage managers, everyone involved, to then out the other end have the massive blockbuster shows in London. You don't get Warhorse or Harry Potter out of thin air. Those shows, if you look at who works on them, those people come through a really amazing, successful theatre ecology. And that's something we should be proud of and should be working to keep. But actually, if you're just talking about the money, then there's a very strong financial argument for making sure that you keep funding regional theatres properly and make sure that there's a writers group in Hull, for instance. or Liverpool or Manchester or Birmingham. But then there's this bigger conversation that I feel like that party and those politicians will never have, would almost be embarrassed to have, about the actual meaning in people's lives. And it's that overused Winston Churchill quote that he may or may not have actually have said, that, you know, should we choose between the war effort and the arts? And he was supposed to have said, well, if we don't choose both, then what's the point? You know, if the theatre's closed, then why do you want to win the war? What are we coming home to? I'm definitely paraphrasing Winston Churchill there. But I have felt that very deeply lately. I think all the way through this, there's been a kind of repetitive statement of, you know, in times like these is when we need the arts the most. And I've definitely felt that from the start, but maybe distracted by the kind of the stresses and the practicalities of the last 6 months, I've kind of paid lip service to, we need the arts, because, you know, the news is all about how we need PPE, for instance. But then just the last few weeks, I've actually really felt the need, you know, like the kind of longing to be able to sit in a theatre and see something that could make some sense of the last 6 months. And I've been listening to the New Yorker podcast lately, which one of the things they do is kind of writers read out short stories and they discuss them. And this is a long-winded way of explaining something, but they read out a Haruki Murakami short story from a collection of his called After the Earthquake, all stories set in the aftermath of an earthquake in Japan in the 1990s. So all in small, delicate ways, dealing with trauma and shock and loss and, you know, culture disrupted, lives disrupted. And it kind of just hit me in the gut hearing this particular story and hearing the discussion around it, that actually there's a danger in times of stress, you know, extreme national trauma to international trauma, to get quite small and self-serving and inward looking. And actually, you know, we shouldn't be necessarily ashamed of that. We're all worrying about our kids and our parents and how to get through the week, aren't we? But actually, one massive important thing that the arts does is kind of shake us and make us look outside that and, you know, think bigger and remember we're part of a community, which is, you know, right back to what I was saying earlier. And as much as the first few weeks of all this back in March, there was kind of a shock how much we're all part of a community. Like, oh God, you know, if someone doesn't take the risk of emptying my bin, you know, who's going to empty my bin? You know, the person on the checkout in the supermarket is holding the fabric of society together. Why have we never, you know, thought enough about this? But then at the same time, I think over time, it's all so much to process that I think people can become quite small in their thinking and quite protective, maybe. You know, our own experience is hard enough to deal with emotionally, so maybe we just would rather not think about what's happening next door. So that telling stories and exploring fictions is actually vital, that word again, to allow us over time to work out what's happened to us and why, and how we can come through it, and how we can feel part of something bigger again and not just kind of small reactionary people.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that would win me over. I don't know about anyone else, but I mean, I'm not a Tory. I'm going to say blatantly that No.
I kind of forgot I was talking to Boris and Rishi and Oliver there. If I had been, I probably wouldn't have used quite.
I mean, you can add to this if you want to tack on an addendum just for them three. But that was beautiful, all of what you just said. I mean, I just like I need to agree with that again and again.
You know what? I'm trying so hard all the time not to be angry at the moment, because it's exhausting, and it feels like it takes something out of me. And actually, you know, I'm not talking directly to them, and I can't you know, improve things by getting myself wound up about how angry I am with those politicians and that situation. So it's that thing of really trying to focus on what is in my control and get on with writing that script, talk to people like you, make good conversations happen. Yeah, try and resist the rant, and then maybe one day when the pubs are open again, you'll buy me a pint, and then the rant will all come out.
That's a deal. That's
Excellent.
a definite
that sounds
deal.
like a perfect plan for a much nicer future. Yeah, and I think this idea that we can have agency in building the future through this as well, and actually that as much as the government will put in policy and they'll put in rules or guidance or whatever, we are a community, and actually we can, as much as we're dependent on their policy on funding, and like you talk about this managed decline, you might call it, of certain, especially certain regions, but we as a community can be a community regardless of what they're doing in sort of central government. And actually I think we've got agency and power to be able to start shaping that future for ourselves as well. And this, for me, is a real good opportunity to start having potentially conversations we would never have. I mean, I think we're already seeing those sorts of conversations about things like diversity, about things like even things like employment rights, and how much of theatre is dependent on casual staff and freelance staff. And I think these really difficult conversations wouldn't have come out of anything other than crisis. And actually, I think you're totally right in that idea of sitting and being angry isn't often the most helpful thing you can do for yourself, and actually finding the productive out of it and doing that. It's definitely something I've been trying to embrace. I mean, it's really strange. I talk to my friends, and I'm never the optimistic person in my friendship group, but through this entire thing I've been going, it's going to be fine. We are going to be fine because we have to be fine. And I think I've had this determined optimism that, you know what, we'll make it okay even if it can't be okay. And so I completely agree and appreciate everything you've just said. Is my sort of way of responding to what you just said in a lovely rambly way back.
Yeah, and there's a really good point in there as well about freelancers, and I think the fact that the arts have been so stretched for so long, the slack of that has, obviously not entirely, but a lot of the slack of that has been picked up by freelancers and casual workers. And actually, people have been running themselves ragged for far too long. People within theatre staff in arts institutions, and freelancers. Everyone's been doing twice the job for half the money, and the show must go on. And actually, it's quite good to have this moment of pause to say, well, when we start again, can we be kinder to ourselves, to use a kind of trendy term, but can we actually think about workers' rights and ways of doing things that don't mean that we're constantly exhausted and not spending enough time with our kids, and try and make sure that there's a better way of making work in the future in that regard. Yeah,
I had a really interesting chat about this idea quite early on in the pandemic. I was on a group video call with a lot of people I work with from all up and down the country, who we all work together at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and we were all talking about locally how our local theatres and spaces were responding, because we have a few people who are in Australia and then people who are up and down the country as well, and we were just having a bit of a sharing of information essentially. And this idea came up with the fact that actually a pandemic does one thing really well, and it makes you think about your health. And it makes you think about your physical health, and you have to put in so many guards for your physical health in a pandemic. We have to wear a mask, we have to wash our hands, we have to be distanced. And this idea came up that actually this is a brilliant opportunity to start thinking about our mental health in the same way that we think about our physical health. And actually, if the one thing a pandemic can bring is this new way of talking about your health in a way that's not seen as, oh, you're shirking your responsibility, oh, you're calling in a sickie for work. This idea that actually your health is a really vital thing that needs to be a priority within your working life as well, I think is something that can come out of this as well. As another tangent for another day perhaps, but yeah, definitely just reminded me of that conversation.
No, absolutely, it's all connected, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us, Lizzie. This has been fantastic to have this chat.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just looking out my window. It's a bit of a cloudy day, but lovely chats nonetheless.
Yeah, I have fluorescent lighting, so it's very bright in here. But this has been a nice brightness rather than fluorescent brightness.
Yeah. If people would like to find your work or what you're up to, are there ways that people can do that?
Yeah, the website is nunnerynorheim.com, Nunnery, and then Norheim is Norheim, and that's all like music, me and Vida are making, but also stuff about my writing as well. And yeah, if you search for that, you'll find all you need to know.
Excellent. I'll stick a link to that website in the description for the podcast, so anyone can just go on the description wherever you're listening to this and find that link as well.
Thank you for listening to The Voices Project. This podcast is produced by March for the Arts. The Voices Project is an open platform for anyone who is involved in any way with the arts to share their thoughts, feelings and experiences of art in the current crisis. If you would like to participate and share your voice, you can find out how to do that by visiting our website, www.marchforthearts.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to give us a review, subscribe or share. You can find out more about what we're doing on our social media.